Good morning from me to you. So, everything I'm going to say this morning is really, truly nothing new to humanity. I've had no insights that will move us light years forward. Probably you could, but I think really that this life of growing and learning isn't really about having necessarily great big giant revolutionary insights all the time. Sometimes it's about having insights just for ourselves, just that. So I'm going to tell a little story that happened recently, and just share with you some of my reflections, some of my ruminations after this story. So there's some growth and some insight for me, and I'm sharing it with the hope that some of my ruminations might touch on something for you. So the story is this, that we had a bunch of rain in the spring, and it was time for me to clean my gutters so that I wasn't going to have rot on the eaves of my house and all of that. So I've done this lots of times before, but apparently not frequently enough, so it was high time that I did it. I got out my ladder and proceeded to clean my gutters, which I don't know how many of you have done this, but it's if you haven't done it for like a year or so, it's kind of gross. It's sludgy, it's black, it's smelly. It's a fragrance all its own. So, and you should know that my house is a single-story ranch-style house. So I've done it before. It's about, if I stand on my back porch, I can jump and touch the eaves. It's not super tall. So I cleaned my gutters. And as I went all the way around, and as I got to the very last spot, I noticed there's branches on the roof, and some of those pipes that stick up that don't, I don't know, other people's houses, they seem to have hats on them. Mine didn't have any hats on them, so I thought I better go and measure them. So I called my husband, Bruce, and said, come over here. I'm going to call these numbers down to you. So I climb on the roof. I'm feeling really good about what a great job I'm doing being a home caretaker. And I throw the branches off, and I measure the pipes, and I call out the numbers, and I come back, and he's holding the ladder, and I start to climb down, and it's time for me to swing my midsection over. And I can't do it. I flat out cannot do it. And I say, well, that's not going to work. Babe, just come down. I gotcha. It's fine. I try again. I can't get off the roof because there's that little moment where I have to swing my midsection. I see nodding in the back. Someone has been here and done this. I can't bring myself to go over the open ground, and the longer I'm up there, the more terrified I am. The closer to the edge I get, I can't go there. So I scramble backwards, and I'm up there. I say, I can't get down. Well, I don't want to take all my time this morning to tell you the details of how long it took us, but suffice it to say that we tried 2 ladders so that I could put like 1 foot on one and one on the other. But that would require my midsection to be in between them, so that wasn't going to work. We tried making the ladder really long so that I could hold on to it and get down. We tried making it short so I could just sort of slide down and my husband's holding my feet. I can touch something. I couldn't get down off the roof. It was like there was a glass wall that, like at the zoo, the kind that chimpanzees can't break. I couldn't get through. So finally, he says, well, what do you want to do? Because at that point, I was also no longer really friendly or kind. I had deteriorated to some cursing, some general belligerence, some obstinacy. I don't know where that all came from. And I said, well, go across the street and get the neighbor. The neighbor's a firefighter. He said, what do you want me to do to get him? Well, he'll have a better ladder, better than our crappy ladders. So he says, he won't have a better ladder, Suzanne. You can really, I can come up and hold your hand, and then you can, that's not going to work either, because then I was certain that I was going to pull him off the roof. We were both going to end up on the ground with heads squashed like watermelons that have fallen, and I told him that my son is not old enough to be the head of the household, so that was not going to work. So he goes to get the neighbor. The neighbor's not home. He comes back, and he finally says, what's your plan? Well, I'm going to stay up here. Okay, Suzanne. So he leaves me up there for a few minutes, and I stay up there, and I try to calm down. I try to remember the stuff we learn in Unity. I did try. But every time I started to scoot towards the edge of the roof, it all went out the window. So I watched the bats a little bit. It turns out we have a lovely, healthy bat population in my neighborhood, which I was really glad about. I like bats. So finally he says, may I have your permission to call the fire department? Yes. So he calls the fire department from the ladder, and I tell them, while he's on the phone with the dispatcher, you better not turn any lights on. You better not turn any sirens on. I don't want any noise. I don't want anybody to hear about this. I was on and on and on, and I'm censoring for you guys. I hope they never release the recording of that phone call. So they ask all the right questions. Is she hurt? Is she having a stroke or what? Like, is there something the matter with her? No, she's just a angry lady on the roof that can't come down. That won't come down. So he gets off the phone. He says, all right, babe, I'm going to go to the front and meet them, and they'll be here any second, which at this point has become obvious because, contrary to my very gentle instructions, I can hear sirens from every part of town. They are converging. Mere minutes later, thank you to our fire department, moments later, there were 4 fire trucks in my street. They shut down the street, which I happen to know because my son, who was coming home from soccer practice while this was all going on, his friend couldn't pull into the street because there were too many fire engines. They also brought 2 ambulances, just in case Bruce got up on the roof and fell down with me. I don't know. And a couple of supervisor trucks. I saw all that later. So this was a very exciting evening for us. I heard later from Bruce that he counted there were 16 firefighters in my yard. When I looked down, I could have sworn it was 157. They were very nice. My neighbor heard the call on his scanner and was the first one to come over. I don't know where he came from, but he heard it on his app on his phone. I don't know. So he was there, and another young gentleman came onto the roof and also invited me to hold his hands while I get onto the ladder, and I told him the same thing that I had told my husband, and I told him that if I wasn't going to hold my husband's hands, I sure as heck wasn't going to hold his hand. And so they were very patient. Ultimately, what he said was, he handed me a strap that looks kind of like a dog leash. They call it webbing, I guess. Like the handle of a dog leash. And explained to me, after it took a lot of patience on his part, I'm very grateful, to to get me to just be quiet long enough to actually listen to the instructions. And he explained, look, it's physics. If I go across the peak of the house, you can't actually pull me up and over. I'm bigger than you. You don't have enough force and strength to do that. That made sense to me. I pondered that for a second. I thought, oh, okay. So I grabbed a hold of his strap, turned around, and climbed down the ladder just easy as you please. It was no big deal. So, some thoughts after that incident. Well, I need to tell you where the thoughts came from, and that's that there's a second part of my story. At least for me, that really matters. Actually, it's the more important part. I was so embarrassed about all of this. I was just mortified, and really what I wanted to do was not talk to anybody in my neighborhood or see anybody in my neighborhood for, a few weeks, which I figured that would be enough time for them to forget all about it. But it turns out that it's hard to avoid all of your neighbors all the time, especially since I have kids. I need to get in and out of the house, groceries, whatever. So a couple times I saw my neighbor, the firefighter, and just sort of avoided eye contact and just kind of avoided him. But he forced the issue and smiled and waved hello. And then when I did that the second day, he forced the issue a little bit more and said, hey, you really don't need to be embarrassed. You really don't. There's nothing to be embarrassed about. It's really, really okay. So we had a conversation in which he explained that although the firefighters are not afraid of a 10-foot roof, that part of their training involves figuring out what their limit is. And so that's something that they practice and train for. And their training involves being in situations that give them heart palpitations, that are terrifying for them. And the training helps them to learn how to move through that, how to cope with that in that moment. So he explained that no one there of the 16, not 157 people in my yard had any judgment at all about my inability to swing my rear off the roof and over onto the ladder. We're just talking inches, but nobody had any judgment about that. That they understand whatever it is, whatever situation you find yourself in, what it feels like in that moment. Which really, that's what empathy is, right? That is what empathy is connecting to that. So then the neighbors who know he's a firefighter, and given that this was only a couple days after, and so nobody had forgotten that there were lots of fire trucks in the street, neighbors started coming over and wanting to chat. And my neighbor said, so they asked him, so what happened? What's with all the fire trucks? What happened? And with me standing right there, he says, her! It was her! She was on the roof! She couldn't get down, I thought, no, I can't believe you said that. But what happened was not what I was so afraid of. What happened was what we would all hope for. They all said, oh, yeah, I can understand that. Oh, I get that. Oh, I can relate. Oh, I'm afraid of heights too. And then he told them that at one point in my conversation with him, I had told him about the healthy bat population, just trying to, inject a little humor in our conversation. So he told one of the neighbors, and guess what she said? She was laying up there watching the bats. And this gentleman, who's an ex-police officer, visibly shivered and said, oh, I hate bats. I used to get calls at the police department. I don't know why. It always seemed like it was me that had to go out and do a bat extraction from somebody's house or attic or whatever. And oh, I hate them. And all of a sudden, my spirit just soared free, because for me, that was not my limit. I said, oh my gosh, really? I just saved a bat out of a pool just the other day. And he went, whoa. And I thought, oh, well, look at that. They do understand. They do get it. We connected. It was such a relief. So all of this, resisting that I was doing, resisting the community, resisting the sharing, resisting all of that was just making my shame and making it grow. And so my neighbor knew better. So I thought about all of this, and I thought, we all have limits somewhere. We all do. That's what my neighbors were telling me. That's what I was hearing. We all have limits somewhere, and we can absolutely overcome our limits. And it's so much better to do that with help and support from others. The firefighters don't tackle their limits alone, right? They work in teams. They have a whole group. And they're famous for their brotherhood, their sisterhood, that camaraderie they have. And that's a kind of community. And so we practice and we talk about and we think about offering help to others and being a blessing to others. But I think accepting help is also a really beautiful thing. Accepting help helps. It also, I think, develops trust. I think it can create mutuality. And it builds community. And I think it turns out that trust and mutuality and community are fundamental human needs. So if you imagine for a second what it would be like to move through life without any trust, or any mutuality, or any community, what would that feel like? What does it feel like to be afraid to share? If you've ever been alone, what does that feel like? Or what if you've wanted to share with someone and been afraid to? Has anybody ever scrolled through all their contacts and said, nah, because you were afraid to share what was on your mind and were afraid maybe you wouldn't be met with the acceptance or non-judgment that you really, really need or hope for? We need trust. What happens when we're unwilling to ever ask for help? Have you ever felt sad because somehow your relationship might be unbalanced? Or because you're always giving to others, but secretly you feel as if some of your own needs in the relationship might not be met? But somehow you can't quite figure out how to ask for what you need? We need mutuality. What about shame and embarrassment? I was certainly wallowing in it. But what happens when we experience those feelings? And for me, I know that the most dangerous thing about those is when I allow them to grow, when I give them room to grow. And the way to do that is to keep them to myself. But left unspoken, those feelings are harder to purge. And I think we need a community in which to do our purging work. I think here is one community that we have in which we get to do some purging work. I learned this lesson one time before, actually. Apparently, I need to learn it again. Is I participated in a spiritual reading group a long time ago, and I shared a painful and shameful admission of a choice that I regret very deeply. And I expected, embraced myself for disapproval, for a distancing of the friendships, and for an imagined catastrophe. After all, right, I'd harbored those shameful thoughts for a really long time, for many years. And instead, though, what I was met with, much like in this neighborhood chat, was compassion. Not only that, my admission sort of unleashed a flood of similar admissions for many others in the group. And it seems like my willingness to share freely was sort of this opening door for others to share, and there was a sense of general relief and a really, really deep connection. So So it was huge. It wasn't a catastrophe, but it was huge. So sharing my shame then and seeking support from that group, just in sharing it, not even necessarily asking for anything in particular, but just sharing it, then brought not only me, but everyone in that space, trust and mutuality and community. So in Unity, right, we talk about changing the thoughts we think, just like we sang this morning, and we talk about replacing negative beliefs with more positive affirmations. And we speak of this as affirming what we believe to be true on a deeper level. And it's, it's hard to do. It's easier said than done. And I think that doing it, for me, I do better in community. I don't know if any of you guys read the Number One Ladies Detective Agency books. They're a favorite of mine. And the main character there, Mara Maxwell, says, "We are born to talk to other people. We are born to be sociable and to sit together with others in the shade of the acacia tree and talk about things that happened the day before. We were not born to sit in kitchens by ourselves with nobody to chat to." Sharing our pain with others is an invitation to allow others to gift us with their care. And it really is a very precious, sacred thing. And just for a second, let's imagine what happens if the situation is reversed. What happens when we want to give, but our gift is not accepted? What happens when we want to offer support and others don't want what we offer? What happens if others simply don't give us the opportunity to even be present with them? Have you ever found out belatedly that someone close to you has had major life changes and you found out only after it was all done? How do you feel? Maybe confused about the relationship. What you thought was close suddenly doesn't feel so close. You wonder. It feels a little disconnecting. The same author, Alexander McCall Smith, also writes in a different novel, "Gracious acceptance is an art which most never bother to cultivate. We think that we have to learn how to give, but we forget about accepting things, which can be much harder than giving. Accepting another person's gift is allowing him to express his feelings for you." And Brené Brown says, until we can receive with an open heart, we're never really giving with an open heart. When we attach judgment to receiving help, we knowingly or unknowingly attach judgment to giving help. So what did I receive on my whole saga on the roof? I received tangible, practical help from the firefighters, which I did not accept gracefully. I received professional, caring treatment from the firefighters, which I did also not accept graciously. I received kindness and empathy from my neighbor in the following days, which I accepted reluctantly. I received kindness and understanding and compassion from other neighbors, which I was ultimately able to accept gracefully after I clearly got the message of non-judgment repeatedly from both my husband and the neighbors. So I have some work to do. I want to just take 1 second to say, so what does receiving gracefully, what does that even look like? How do you do that? And I don't want to spend a ton of time on that, but a lesson that I learned from one of my early nonviolent communication teachers, Jean Ryan, was to receive gracefully. Firstly, you have to be open. You have to just simply be open to receiving. But secondly, to receive gracefully means perhaps to consider letting the other person know. It goes beyond saying merely thank you, but letting the other person know in what way their gift, whether it's intangible, practical, or it's spiritual, or words, doesn't matter, in what way their gift was meaningful to you. What need of yours did that meet? How was this enriching for your life? I'll be working on that. So while there are many ways to meet our need for trust and mutuality and community, right? This is just one thought, this business of receiving. Being willing to ask for help or to invite others to support us and to graciously receive such support is one way to have trust, mutuality, and community. Sometimes we don't even have to ask. We're wise to just simply receive, because there are lovely people in the world who bring blessings to us without us ever having stated a request. After what I felt like was the entirety of the Manhattan firefighting department in my yard, after they helped me get down from the roof, I thought that I was going to prefer to wallow in my embarrassment. My husband and my neighbors knew better. I thought I was going to prefer to isolate, that would be better for me. They knew better, and I'm very grateful. And sometimes it feels like it takes courage to reach out to others to connect. But I think the lessons that we learn in this life are the nitty-gritty stuff that we learn in relationships. And relationships are give and take. So I think both are worthy of our consideration, our practice, our attention, even when it takes courage to do that. So I just want to end with one quote from Brené Brown about courage that I like very much. Courage is like a habitus, a habit, a virtue. You get it by courageous acts. It's like learning to swim by swimming. You learn courage by couraging. Blessings.